Jean-Francois Corté is our next speaker, and he has worked for 25 years at the French Public Works Research Laboratory in the areas of geotechniques and pavement engineering, where he managed different research teams before being appointed as the technical director for the roads sector. In early 2002, Mr. Corté joined the World Road Association, which is PIARC, as the Secretary General until April of this year. He is a member of the Council of the French Transportation Ministry. In addition, he is responsible for courses on road design at the I'll pronounce this wrong, Collège des Ponts, one of the oldest and most prestigious French grande écoles. Mr. Corté was chief editor and co-editor of a number of French technical guidelines in French geotechniques and pavement engineering published by the French administration. He is a graduate engineer of École Polytechnique and École Nationale des Ponts, in France, as a master and as a master's in civil engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. I think you're going to see a different perspective, and this is unique because I've heard Mr. Corté speak before. And pavement preservation is more than an engineering issue, and it's a social issue as well. I think that he's going to shed some new light on some things that maybe we should think about as well. So with that, Mr. Corté.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you. Many thanks to the National Pavement Preservation Center, to FP2 and the other members of the organizing committee for this invitation to make this address at the opening session of this edition of NPPC. It's a great honor for me to talk to you today. It's also a great opportunity for me to meet again those of you who attended the Pavement Preservation and Recycling Summit that we organized in 2015 in Paris. That was indeed an exciting and a very successful conference I had the pleasure to work for and share. As said by Larry, until last April, I've been working as Secretary General of the World Road Association, PIARC. This association was established now in 1909 at the dawn of the automobile to foster international cooperation to promote progress in the area of road and road transport. Now it has over 120 government members of this association, and the United States are very well represented, and we have an excellent involvement of the US. Butch is now a member of the executive committee. We have very close relation with AASHTO, and good representation on the different technical committees from Federal Highway and DOTs. Now, after the World Road Association, I'm working back in the Ministry of French Ministry in charge of transport, and I recently moved to the Directorate of Transport Infrastructure, where I'm in charge of the technical policy and support for the National Road Network. As compared to what is mentioned in your program, I slightly changed the title of my presentation to be closer to the motto of this conference, that is Continuing Drive for Change. But before I get to the presentation, just start with a quick drill. I will ask you to show hand those who are not convinced of the importance of preservation of road infrastructure and of its impact. Come on. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Larry. I don't think I have anything else to say. Well, in fact, I don't have to try to convince you, but what we have to talk about is to convince those who are outside of this conference room. And the purpose of my speech will be to shed light on some issues which might provide to you some input in making the case of pavement preservation. And Carlos was supposed to speak after me, but since he spoke before, there are many things that will reinforce what he's just said. At the 2015 Paris conference, in my opening address, I chose to display recent excerpts of newspapers articles from all around the world dealing with the deterioration of roads. And I could easily find dozens of those papers produced in the previous year. They were from everywhere, from Germany, where they were wondering why their roads could be in such bad condition. In the UK, you found a guy saying that dog walking has opened his eyes to the state of the roads, but also that the Time was claiming that the £6 billion that were promised by the Department of Transport would not be sufficient to repair countries' roads. From Spain also, the budget for road preservation decreased by 38% over the previous 5 years. In Japan also, there was a last warning for quick, rapid maintenance on a large scale. China also, they were warning about the condition of bridges and urban roads needing accelerated rehabilitation. And of course, many other examples from the US also. So I could find a number of these examples, and what those papers are demonstrating is two things. Well, firstly, you can be reassured that the problem is not limited to the US, but is unfortunately largely spread worldwide. But secondly, and more important, that public everywhere is very much concerned by the condition of their roads. It's true in all countries, and this is why it's reflected by the media. Of course, the situation has not changed much within 1 year. So today in my presentation, I will touch upon the following 4 items. Placing transport back on the agenda. Where are we now? Making the case for maintenance. Acting for preservation of the assets. And a few words about climate change adaptation and resiliency. Placing transport back on the agenda. And here, I think we need to take a broad perspective. And for that, I will refer to decisions from the United Nations. In 2001, the United Nations published the Millennium Development Goals. If you look at the resolution from the UN, you will find no reference at all to transport in the UN declaration, except one single mention of the word transport in relation to landlocked developing countries. How is that at that time, no country, no one stood up and say, what about transport? Not as a goal, but why don't you mention anything about transport? And this had a very important consequences. Those consequences were that the transport and transport projects dropped, the priority of that dropped a lot, fell down a lot in the program of the development banks and other agencies. And it took 12 years before another UN report we find at last a correct recognition of the role of transport. And I quote. So this appeared in the report published in 2012, that is the Rio +20, the future we want, where we finally find this statement. We know that transportation and mobility are central to sustainable development. Sustainable development can enhance economic growth and improve accessibility, sustainable transport achieves better integration of the economy while respecting the environment. And this was followed immediately by a publication of a commitment of the different multilateral development banks, which said we all together are committed to spend $175 billion of loans and grants for more sustainable transport in developing countries by 2022. So you see that consideration paid to transport is very important, and it's important at the highest level. If it's not here, then we are in trouble. Now the situation is not that bad. You know certainly that the UN published the Sustainable Development Goals last year, and if transport is not, and there's no reason for having transport as a sustainable goal in itself, but it appears explicitly in at least 7 of these SDGs. It appears to combat climate change, to build effective institutions in relation to access to education, access to health, making cities resilient, building a resilient infrastructure, and sustainable economic growth. Where are we now? Well, we have inherited the very large investment which have been made. I'm speaking here for the high-income countries from the late 60s and 50s, and mainly from the 60s. That's true in the US, but that's true all over the world. And these large investments were made to develop a modern road transport system with highways and upgrading to new standards existing main roads. But we are here dealing with objects, that is pavements, for instance, which are built for a service life of, say, 20 to 40 or over, and they don't need major maintenance work before a number of years, maybe 7 to 12 or more. The consequence of that is that people do not anticipate the need for maintenance and the need for budgeting maintenance. And the result, unfortunately, is in many countries we have a large and neglected aging stock. This is the result of no anticipation, as no immediate resource was necessary for some time. And what we can see is that the resources for maintenance have not been increased in relation to the growth of the assets and the aging of the stock. I will not spend much time on the numbers in the US, you know that, and I picked them from the White House report, an economic analysis of transportation investment. I will spend more time in presenting a couple of graphs. The first one is coming from OECD, the International Transport Forum. It shows public road maintenance share of total road expenditure. You have a bunch of graphs here. The one in red is the one for the US, and the other ones for a group of countries. For Western Europe, it's the dotted green line at the bottom. What we see, this covers the period from 1995 to 2011. Two interesting things. Despite the fluctuations, we see that unfortunately the rate tends to decrease. Although we are, as I said, we're not taking care of the continuously increasing stock of assets that we have. And the other also important thing, if we look at the bottom, that is the period after the financial crisis, we see even a larger drop. And that's unfortunately what we see almost in all countries, when things are getting wrong, one of the first cuts is on budget for maintenance, and that's what is clearly demonstrated here. Another graph, interesting graph, was produced by the European Road Federation, taking figures from investment and road maintenance investment in a number of countries from Western Europe. The green curve on the top is about investment, and the red one below is about maintenance. And to me, this curve shows what do they show? When things are going well, we both increase investment and slightly maintenance. And when things are getting back, we cut down on both. But there's no rationale in that. Again, the fact that the assets, the stock is increasing, even if it's slightly increasing and it is aging, should be reflected in the trends regarding the relative amount of money that we spend on investment and maintenance, which is not the case. I looked at some figures in the US, and I found on the internet some interesting sites from a group called Smart Growth America. I don't know how good these figures are, but I think it's important that we look also at how the civil society is looking at our problem, what they are interested in, and how they think things are. And what they say is that between 2009 and 2011, the US states altogether spend $20.4 billion annually to build new roads and add lanes, which represent an added mileage of only 1% of the total lane miles. And they spend $16.5 billion annually to maintain the 99% of the rest. And at the same time, the percentage of roads in good conditions dropped from 41 to 37%. So we had example of a good state with Utah. I just picked another one, which is the Washington State, where these websites say that they spent during this period 84% of the spendings on new road infrastructure, and at that same time the share of roads in poor condition rose from 12 to 27%. Carlos said it before, the road networks is generally the first public assets. I'm coming back to that, taking another example, this time with France. The total road network in France is 1 million kilometers, including county roads and municipality roads, and they represent over $2,000 billion. But what is interesting is to relate that to the GDP, and it's almost 90% of France's GDP. So it's indeed a huge asset. And if we consider the national road network, which is operated and maintained by the state, it represents approximately 20,000 kilometers. It's worth $250 billion, and that's about 2/3 of the total state tangible assets. So that's indeed a very large asset. A large public asset to maintain, but very few local politicians hear the importance of preservation of the road assets. With the exception of few one, on the picture you might recognize Schwarzenegger when he was governor of California, filling potholes there. Usually what we hear is, okay, there may be some cracks, but you can still ride on the road, so let's see later before we make a decision. What we're facing is this cut the rubber and run problem. Look at all these people. They're happy, they're proud on the day of the inauguration. And for the lady, look at that. There's a need for a special helmet for holding the scissors. But why do these people forget very quickly what they have just cherished? I think among the explanation, I found a good statement which was produced in 1989 by a person called Edward Reagan in the Proceedings of the Academy of Political Science. And this is quoted by Scott Knowles, who is publishing a report about the slow disaster and the politics of infrastructural decay. I quote, "Deferring maintenance is a handy expedient for public officials faced with problems in balancing their budgets. There are significant fiscal and political incentives for public officials to defer maintenance in good times as well as bad. Those benefits lead them to overlook basic common sense and responsible management." And unfortunately, this analysis is true not only in the US but in many countries. So we need to make the case for maintenance. We need to be advocating this case. Carlos said it in a very eloquent way before, and I will re-emphasize that. But when we're going to make the case for maintenance, the first one we have to speak to is speak to the public and address social expectations to influence the politicians and make the good decisions. And for that, I took one example from UK. You know, we have a problem with them, with Brexit, but sometimes they have brighter ideas. And some of them are here. It's taken from a report produced by the Department for Transport. It's called Action for Roads, and it was published in July 2013. And one of among the first sections of this report is why roads matter. And look at what they say, and they start considering what is the importance of roads in everyone's everyday life. This report is starting by saying our road network supports all our daily lives, and everyone in the UK has benefited from the investment made since the 1950s. Roads get us to work. Roads give us access to the goods and services. Roads connect us with family and friends. There's no question of money here. It's a question of, first of all, our lives. And then they move to the economic aspects. Our road network is also the lifeblood of the economy. They provide critical connections. They support job creation and unlock new development. They help the UK compete internationally. And they support business travel. That's not different from what you could replace UK by Utah and Tennessee. And it's about the same kind of idea. If we move now to a more technical perspective from functionality, it's clear that deferral of maintenance works leads to less availability of the transport system, resulting from reduced capacity and also a more fragile and less resilient network. The consequences, as you all know, increased congestion, delays, less travel time reliability, and most importantly also degradation of road safety. The economic issues were, in the case of US, you probably all know this report, which was produced by ACU in 2013, Failure to Act, the Impact of Current Infrastructure Investment on America's Economic Future, which provides some figures that I put here on the screen, showing what is the direct cost to households and businesses, and how these big figures, large figures, can even increase dramatically in the coming decades if no action is being taken. There is not so many studies that provide figures about the economic impacts. And again, from the UK, some interesting figures we can find. For instance, there was a study undertaken under the YouGov stating that for England and Wales, poor condition of local roads are costing small and medium-sized enterprises approximately £5 billion each year through operational inefficiencies, production delays, raw material and end product delivery delays, and vehicle repair costs. Another study was produced by Transport Scotland, where they say, okay, let us consider a dramatic reduction in the budget for maintenance, and what would be the consequences? Are we saving money or not? And under the 40% maintenance reduction scenario, what was shown that every pound of reduction led to 1.5 in quantifiable cost to society. So the net result is obviously a loss, not for the Department for Transport, but for the society in Scotland in general. From an asset preservation perspective, deferral of maintenance works results in increasing the backlog between the available resources and the actual needs, high cost of rehabilitations. As you know, degradations accelerate further degradations, and what is most important, least efficiency of use of public funds, as the decisions in those cases about roadworks become largely determined by emergency situations. And you know that in those cases, reconstruction costs often perversibly are taking funds slated for maintenance. To illustrate that interesting example here is coming from Spain, where they show that the lack of maintenance, figures showing what is the consequences of deferring maintenance, showing the dramatic increase of cost of investment that was related to lack of maintenance. On this issue, we collectively must act in a responsible way. We have to argue that deferred maintenance is no more than a disinvestment. And secondly, inadequate maintenance affects not only the present generation, but it places undue financial burden on future generations, and I don't think that this is what we want to achieve. These things and others are being presented in a report that we prepared with the DFID, Department for International Development in the UK, and it's called Preserve Your Country's Roads to Drive Development. I moved to acting for assets preservation. One of, I think, the first thing I want to mention is this issue of valuation, which was already mentioned by Carlos before. Valuation of road infrastructure assets using accumulated condition-based depreciation. These ideas are not very old. They were advocated only in the in the 90s, and the OECD at that time produced a report about performance indicators and stated that this was the most useful indicator and is best summary descriptor for the long-term performance of the road network. It has many benefits, and I want to highlight those things. It facilitates communication, and Carlos talked about trust, and I want to reinforce that. I want to reinforce the importance of promoting also accountability, and this is a way of making people more accountable. On this issue of valuation, pioneer work was made in the Australia and New Zealand in the 90s. It is still not generalized, but there is a trend for expanding the use of valuation. And I found that in Canada in 2012, 2008, they passed a law that said all municipal governments to record and include all tangible capital assets in financial statement under the care and control of the municipality. Assets are recorded at their historical cost and depreciated to the current period. So we need this kind of indicators. They're important for accountability and transparency. It is clear that nowhere the backlog can be reduced in 1 year. So if this is true, then there is only one consequence. We need a multi-annual vision, a strategy and action plan for all. And this is needed for everyone. This is needed for the road owners, of course, to recover control on the evolution of the condition of the network, to rationalize public program, and to make more efficient use of public money. But I want also to emphasize that it is also important for industry, so that they can plan investment in equipment, invest in training, and this can be done without a few years' vision. Requirements, very quickly, I will go through the different stages, just making a few comments. Basic step is obviously to know and monitor the evolution of the condition of the road network. The many tools that exist, they are more or less in place with quality information. Value in monetary terms the road assets and upkeep according to the evolution. This is important and still not generalized. Asset the evolution of the condition of the road network in time without interventions and with different scenarios. Here we still have a difficult engineering problem. There are some modeling approaches which are used in some countries. We have to encourage a lot academy to make progress on this very difficult problem. But we need this if we want to have scenarios that are realistic and reliable. Set objectives. This was also mentioned before. Set objectives to the service condition of the road with different service level according to socio-economic interests of the roads. This is, again, unfortunately, still not generalized. And establish a pluriannual strategy and the assessment of the correlated resources. One couple of burning issues. Almost worldwide, if we accept perhaps Qatar, Norway, Luxembourg, a number of these rich countries, but the issues of funding and securing funding is acute in many countries. I will escape here the debate on funding, seen from the other side of the ocean. Seems to be a very passionate source of political debates here in the state, a good way to spoil a dinner in family and with friends. And I'll leave it to you to discuss whether income tax, zero-make tax, tolling, and so on, well, what should be the best for providing funding. But in the end, we all know that we have to pay for it. Other important, maybe, consideration is this question of the horizon of the annual budget, which is in many cases a severe limitation and prevent some, in many cases, adoption of an actual multi-annual strategies. And this is fueling also the idea that why should I care about multi-annual planning if the current resources that I get are used to face emergency situations? So we need to change this mindset, and we need to have a different way to approach the problem. And for that, we probably there's a strong need for innovation in contracting maintenance. We hear more and more speaking about multi-annual performance-based maintenance contract, which are probably a very good avenue. Yes, but today still there are few experiences and, more important, a lack of feedback on these experiences. Personally, I think that also there is necessity for more cooperation between the public and private sector to develop balanced contracts. If the contracts are not balanced and fair both for contractors and for the public, it will not be successful. It will fail, and people will tend to reject this kind of contract. Another also connected issue is the financing for few years contracts, which is not the same interest of potential lenders as long-term loans. And I move to the last section about climate change adaptation and resiliency. I will be very brief on this matter, but I found important to mention that for a couple of reasons. Natural disasters expose different maintenance. If we have roads or infrastructures in bad condition, they will be more fragile, and usually this will have very important consequences when we are hit with natural disasters. The second aspect is this: we don't have a lot of money, we have to combine preservation and adaptation strategies. And here in this area, I think there's also an area where we need a change in the mindset. Up to now, we have mostly think of reinforcing everything. And in the case of adaptation to climate change, the need is overall to take a more proactive approach to the hazards of climate change and to look at improving the resilience. It is not possible to ensure the physical protection of all the components of the road network, If this is not possible, then in the event of a disaster and the consequences of climate change, we need to seek to improve the resilience of the road network. And what is this resilience? It is the ability to absorb disturbances, to reorganize and recover operation as before the occurrence of the disturbance. In a graphical way, it's about, in fact, reducing the area of this triangle where performance dropped because of the event, and then we try to recover and go back to the previous situation. The World Road Association published recently a report about adaptation and produced a framework for road infrastructure, and it identified the 4 stages that I mentioned on this screen as an approach to making decisions regarding investment in adaptation. But what we have seen is that almost no country or very few countries are far advanced along this process, and they're far from stage 4, that is integrating the findings about the necessity for adaptation in the decision-making processes. Concluding remarks, I will not make a long list, and I will just mention three items, so you can be sure that I'm close to the end of this speech. Continuing the drive for change, I think, is first of all, make the case of road preservation as a social issue and encourage citizens to make their voice heard and put pressure on political for long-term decisions, ensuring sustainability, not for us, but for the sake of our children. We need to reinforce communication to all stakeholders about the condition and the value of the road infrastructure, the economic impact of delayed maintenance, and preservation of the roads. And finally, there's an obvious need to pursue implementation of road asset management to improve decision-making, provide transparency, and promote accountability and advocate for appropriate funding. With this, this is the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention. And on this slide, you can find the website of the World Road Association, where you can find this report among a number of other ones which are can be downloaded for free. Thank you very much.